The stagecoach rattled like an old tin kettle as it crawled up the dirt road cutting through the Wyoming plains. Inside, Emma Caldwell clutched her carpetbag, knuckles white around the handle. Dust drifted in through the cracks in the windows, turning her blue dress a dull brown, but she didn't brush it off. Her heart was pounding too loudly for her to care. The driver spat out the side and turned in his seat. "Next stop's Black Ridge Ranch, miss. You sure this is where you're headed? Ain't nothing out there but a silent man and a whole lot of empty land." She nodded, her voice caught somewhere between a tremor and a whisper. "That's the one." He squinted at her, then chuckled. "Heard tell the folks in town sent you up there as a joke. You must have done something to make those hens cackle." Emma's face heated. "They thought it would be funny," she murmured. "Sending a woman like me to work for a man who doesn't want company." The driver gave a low whistle. "Can't say I envy you." The coach hit another rut, jostling her forward. When it finally stopped at the edge of a lonely spread of land, the sound of the wheels fading into the distance left a silence so thick it pressed against her chest. The ranch stretched out before her, a sea of rough fences, brittle grass, and gray soil clinging to life. The barn was large but weather-beaten, and the house beside it stood like a ghost of what it used to be. And there he was. Ethan McCrae stood beside a fence post, hammer in hand, hat pulled low against the sun. He didn't wave, didn't even flinch as the stagecoach door creaked open. He just looked, steady, still, and unreadable. Emma stepped down carefully, her boots sinking into the dirt. The wind tugged at her bonnet, whipping strands of hair across her face. She forced a smile that felt much braver than she felt. "Mr. McCrae." He nodded once. "I'm Emma Caldwell," she said, straightening. "I was told to come for the housekeeping position." He leaned against the fence post. "Didn't send for one." "I know." She hesitated, then confessed, "The ladies in town sent me." As a kind of joke. The only sign that he'd heard her was the faintest flicker of his mouth, not quite a smile, not quite disdain. His eyes were gray, like a winter sky before snow, and they studied her without hurry. "You in on the joke?" "No, sir," she said quickly. "But I could use the work. And I don't mind hard labor." He was silent for a long moment. The breeze rustled through the grass, and a hawk circled overhead. Then he said, "House is up that way." He turned toward the barn, adding over his shoulder, "If you're stayin', don't burn the beans." That was all. No welcome, no kindness, just a simple acceptance that she existed now on his land. She exhaled slowly and started walking toward the house. Inside, the air smelled of dust, smoke, and disuse. The furniture was solid but unpolished, the floorboards marked by years of boots and work. There were no curtains on the windows, no pictures on the walls. Just silence and emptiness. Emma dropped her bag and rolled up her sleeves. If she was going to be here, no matter how unwanted, she'd make herself useful. She began sweeping, her strokes steady, deliberate, almost angry. The dust rose like ghosts, catching in her throat. She found the kitchen and grimaced at the condition of it. Rusted pots, crumbs scattered across the counter, dishes piled like a monument to neglect. Still, she worked. The rhythm of cleaning steadied her heartbeat, turned fear into focus. When the sun began to dip behind the hills, she lit a small fire in the stove and set about making stew from what little she found: potatoes, onions, beans. By the time the scent filled the room, she was covered in soot but smiling faintly. The door creaked open. Ethan stepped inside, tall and quiet, the smell of horse and wind following him. He paused just inside the threshold, as though unsure if he'd come to the right house. She turned from the stove, startled but pleased. "I hope you don't mind," she said softly. "I thought this place could use a meal and a little warmth." He hung his hat on the wall and studied her. "You work fast." "I don't like sitting still," she said. "It gives worry too much room to grow." He didn't reply, just sat at the table and waited. She ladled stew into 2 bowls and set one before him, taking the other seat across. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the sounds of spoons against tin. Finally, she said, half teasing, "Do you ever talk, Mr. McCrae?" His eyes flicked to hers. "Talkin' don't mend fences. Neither does eatin'." "Alone," she countered, and that earned her something like a smile. After supper, she washed the dishes while he sat by the fire, mending a saddle strap. Every once in a while, he'd glance her way, expression unreadable. It wasn't suspicion, it was something else. Something like confusion. When she stepped outside to shake out the rug, she realized how cold the night had grown. The wind had teeth, and the stars cut sharp against the black sky. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. The morning sun broke across the plains like liquid gold, spilling over the barn roof and painting the world in warmth that didn't quite reach the chill in the air. Emma stood on the porch, watching Ethan move through the corral, his body a rhythm of quiet power. He worked like he breathed, without rush, without waste. The horses seemed to know it too, meeting his calm with their own. She had been at the ranch for 2 weeks now, long enough to learn that silence wasn't emptiness with Ethan McRae. It was something deeper, something that spoke in gestures and glances, in the way he'd always leave half a biscuit on the table, knowing she'd skip breakfast when she got lost in chores. She tugged his coat tighter around her shoulders. He'd given it to her that first night, and though he'd never asked for it back, she'd hung it on a peg by the door, taking it down only when the mornings bit too hard. When he looked up from the corral, their eyes met across the yard. For a second, she thought he'd wave or nod, but instead, he just tipped his hat slightly, his version of a greeting. She smiled to herself and went back inside to start the day. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and wood smoke. The house had changed since she came, it felt alive again. Curtains fluttered by the window. The table gleamed from daily polishing. A small vase of wildflowers stood near the stove, their yellow petals catching the light. She poured coffee and set out 2 mugs. He always came in at sunrise, wordless, boots heavy with dust. Sure enough, a few minutes later, she heard the slow, steady tread on the porch steps. Ethan came in, his shirt damp with sweat, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. "Coffee?" she asked. He nodded, sitting down. She poured for him, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, "You been up since dawn again." "I like the quiet," she said. "It reminds me the world hasn't broken yet." He looked at her, one brow raised. "You think it will?" She gave a small laugh, half nervous, half honest. "It already did. I'm just sweeping up the pieces now." He didn't pry, didn't ask what she meant, though she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, like he understood more than he'd ever say. They ate in that steady silence she'd come to like. After breakfast, she followed him outside to hang laundry. The breeze tugged at the sheets, filling them like sails. Across the yard, she could hear the sound of him repairing a fence, the steady thunk of hammer against wood. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. By midday, dark clouds began to gather in the west. Thunder rolled low and distant. She was just gathering the last of the sheets when she heard it, a crack of wood, a horse's panicked whinny. Her head snapped up. "Ethan," she called. He didn't answer. Without thinking, she dropped the basket and ran toward the corral. The wind whipped her hair into her face as she reached the fence and saw him struggling with the gate. One of the stallions, a big, skittish chestnut, had broken loose, the rope tangled around Ethan's arm. "Stay back," he barked, but she was already moving. The horse reared, eyes wild, hooves striking the air. Ethan braced, trying to calm it, but the animal's panic only grew. Emma grabbed a bucket from the trough, flung water toward its face, and the shock of it made the animal freeze just long enough for Ethan to cut the rope. The horse bolted, vanishing into the hills. Ethan stood there, chest heaving, his sleeve torn, blood trickling down his arm. "Are you hurt?" she cried, running to him. He shook his head, jaw tight. "It's just a scrape," but she caught his wrist before he could pull away. "You're bleeding. I've had worse, and you'll get worse if you don't let me clean it." He stared at her, that quiet defiance meeting her stubbornness head on. Finally, he sighed. "Fine." Back inside, she sat him down by the table. His forearm was cut from wrist to elbow, shallow but long. She found the tin of bandages and clean water, her hands steady even though her heart wasn't. When she touched his arm, his muscles tensed. "You don't have to. I want to," she said softly. He fell silent. As she cleaned the wound, she noticed small things, the scars that already mapped his skin, the roughness of his hands, the way he watched her like she was something fragile but not unwelcome.